Loneliness, when wrapped in the figure of a woman, becomes one of the most misunderstood phenomena in the modern psyche. Society has, for centuries, been accustomed to interpret the image of a woman through her relations with a husband, a lover, a child, or a family. She is rarely perceived as a self-contained being, a complete organism whose existence can stand independent of the masculine figure. The woman who lives alone, without a man, therefore presents not only a social anomaly, but also a profound psychological riddle. Her solitude, whether chosen or imposed, becomes a mirror reflecting the collective anxieties, projections, and hidden desires of the culture that observes her. We must begin by understanding that solitude in a woman is never merely external. The absence of a man from her home does not simply signify an empty chair at the table, a vacant side of the bed, or a quiet hallway where another voice once echoed. It is, rather, an entire reconfiguration of psychic energy. For the woman who lives alone must confront the internalized image of the man, the father, the lover, the protector, the rival that has long resided within her unconscious. She must contend not only with the physical absence of the masculine, but with the dissolution of the psychic contract that society has written into her from birth, that her existence derives meaning through attachment. In psychoanalysis, we are aware that every individual carries within themselves both masculine and feminine elements, or as Jung later termed them, the animus and anima. The woman who lives without a man does not live without the masculine. Rather, she is compelled to awaken it within herself. This awakening is often misinterpreted as hardness, coldness, or self-sufficiency, but it is, in truth, the process of psychic individuation. When the external man disappears, the internal one must be integrated, or else she risks neurosis born of imbalance. It is a curious feature of civilization that a man living alone is often described as independent, focused, or even noble in his solitude. Yet the same state in a woman is cloaked with suspicion. People whisper of emotional failure, bitterness, or hidden wounds. Why does society react so differently to the solitude of the two sexes? The answer lies in our collective unconscious, where woman has long been symbolized as the vessel of life, the container of relationship, the nurturer of continuity. When she refuses or transcends this role, the archetype itself trembles. She ceases to function as the mirror that reflects man's identity back to him, and thus she becomes threatening. Her solitude suggests that she no longer needs to be needed, and this strikes at the root of patriarchal narcissism. In my years of observation, I have often noticed that women who live without men are forced to engage with dimensions of themselves that remain dormant in others. They must confront their desires directly, without the convenient displacement of those desires onto another. The woman who has no partner to define her must face her own libidinal economy. Her instincts, ambitions, fears, and cravings become mirrors with no external face. This confrontation, while painful, is also a rare opportunity for psychological truth. It is not the absence of a man that defines her loneliness, but the presence of herself unmediated, unmasked, unromanticized. From early childhood, women are often taught to love as a means of survival. They are conditioned to seek validation through attachment, to measure worth by affection received. The girl learns to please, to adapt, to intuit the needs of others before her own. When such conditioning is suddenly stripped away through loss, divorce, death, or deliberate choice, the woman is forced into a state of existential nakedness. She must learn to exist not as an object of someone's desire, but as the subject of her own. This transformation is rarely smooth. It often involves grief, rage, rebellion, and profound introspection. The truth about women who live alone is that they are undergoing a silent revolution. Their solitude is not merely circumstantial, it is psychological resistance to centuries of dependency. In solitude, they begin to experience freedom in its most unsettling form, freedom without witness. This freedom has no applause, no validation, no external reinforcement. It is the freedom to exist without being seen through the lens of another's need. It demands courage because it strips away the illusion that love is the only proof of existence. Many of these women encounter, within their solitude, the ghosts of all the roles they were expected to play. They hear, in the silence of their rooms, the echo of cultural injunctions to marry, to bear children, to care, to serve, to soften. These echoes do not vanish easily. They linger, whispering of failure. Psychoanalytically, these voices are the internalized superego of society, the collective conscience that polices female identity. When a woman chooses to live alone, she challenges this internal authority. She begins to rewrite the moral codes by which she was raised. But we must not romanticize this independence as pure triumph. Solitude, even when chosen, carries its own psychic costs. The absence of the other, the intimate witness, leaves certain aspects of the self unmirrored. The human mind craves recognition, and when it is deprived of it, the ego begins to fracture or inflate. The woman living alone may swing between extremes of self-sufficiency and hidden despair. She may overcompensate by rejecting all intimacy, or she may find herself haunted by an unacknowledged longing for connection. In either case, she must integrate these opposing impulses, the desire for autonomy and the hunger for union within her own psyche. It is here that the unconscious becomes a battlefield. Dreams of being pursued, touched, or abandoned often reveal the hidden drama of the solitary woman's mind. In such dreams, the absent man reappears not as an individual, but as a symbol, the embodiment of unclaimed desire or repressed emotion. Her task, then, is not to resurrect the man externally, but to encounter what he represents internally, the vitality, risk, and erotic energy she has perhaps suppressed in the name of self-protection. One must remember that solitude is not the same as isolation. Isolation is the defense mechanism of the wounded ego, a wall built to prevent pain. Solitude, however, is a conscious encounter with oneself. The woman who truly lives alone, not merely without company but with awareness, becomes a philosopher of her own psyche. She begins to observe her inner movements as one might watch the shifting of the sea, the tides of emotion, the storms of memory, the calm of realization. She learns that her mind, once preoccupied with the thoughts of another, now becomes a vast territory to explore. Yet this inner journey can be frightening. Without the daily presence of another to distract or define her, the solitary woman faces the raw truths of existence, mortality, impermanence, meaning. Many experience a spiritual awakening, though not always in the religious sense. The absence of external attachment often makes room for a deeper form of connection with the unconscious, with nature, with creativity. I have seen women who, after years of marriage or relational dependence, discover in solitude an unexpected source of vitality. They paint, write, travel, or simply think in ways that were previously impossible. Their libido, once directed outward, is sublimated into creation. But this process also exposes the fragility of identity. The woman who lives alone must continually negotiate between two fears: the fear of losing herself in others, and the fear of losing herself to herself. The former dominated her earlier life. The latter emerges in solitude. She must learn that independence is not the absence of need, but the ability to live with need consciously. To be alone without collapsing into loneliness requires psychological maturity, the acceptance that love is not a guarantee, but a gift, that existence must stand even when affection withdraws. Society rarely understands such women because they do not serve its fantasies. The solitary woman cannot easily be categorized. She is neither the dutiful wife nor the tragic spinster, neither the liberated hedonist nor the repressed recluse. She is, in a sense, the new archetype, the woman who belongs to herself. Yet even this archetype is unfinished, still forming within the collective psyche. Her image provokes both admiration and discomfort because it suggests the possibility that fulfillment may not depend on attachment. We must also recognize that solitude, when embraced, can become a radical act of healing. For centuries, the feminine psyche has been colonized by external definitions: purity, beauty, sacrifice, motherhood. The woman living alone begins to reclaim her psychic territory. She explores her own desires without shame, her anger without guilt, her intellect without apology. She discovers that her emotional depth does not require a recipient to be valid. In this discovery, she touches the essence of autonomy, not the illusion of self-sufficiency, but the capacity to stand in her own emotional truth. However, the unconscious resists such change. It clings to old attachments, replaying the patterns of dependency even in imagination. Some women living alone unconsciously recreate the dynamic of relationship through their work, their friendships, or even their fantasies. They may project the masculine principle onto ideals, art, career, spirituality, thereby maintaining a symbolic partnership. This, too, can be a form of balance, so long as it does not become another form of servitude. The danger lies when independence itself becomes a new idol, a defense against vulnerability. True freedom is not the denial of need, but the acceptance of it without bondage. In observing such women, I have often been struck by their dreams. They dream of houses with locked rooms, of gardens growing wild, of oceans without shores. These symbols reveal the psychic landscape of solitude: the house as the self, the locked room as repressed potential, the wild garden as instinct liberated from control. When a woman dreams that she walks alone through such landscapes without fear, it signifies that her unconscious has begun to reconcile with her autonomy. The woman who lives without a man often carries an unspoken burden. She must justify her existence to others. Every choice, every moment of happiness or sadness becomes a subject of interpretation. If she smiles, they assume she pretends. If she grieves, they say she regrets. Society, unable to comprehend wholeness outside of partnership, projects its anxiety onto her. But psychoanalysis teaches us that what we condemn in others is often what we repress in ourselves. The discomfort people feel towards solitary women is the reflection of their own fear of aloneness. Thus, the truth about these women is inseparable from the truth about humanity. They reveal, by their mere existence, the fragility of our collective identity, an identity too dependent on validation, too terrified of solitude. In them, we glimpse what it means to live without the mirror of another's gaze. They remind us that love, though profound, is not the only path to meaning. There is also the question of aging. A man growing old alone is often admired for his independence, his devotion to work or intellect. A woman aging alone, however, is often pitied, yet this pity is misplaced. Many solitary women experience aging as liberation, the fading of the demand to please, the loosening of external expectations. They become more honest, more inwardly alive. They begin to live not for admiration, but for truth. Their solitude becomes not a void, but a sanctuary. Still, one must not forget that human beings are relational creatures. Even the most independent woman remains susceptible to the pull of connection. What distinguishes her, however, is her awareness. She may love, but not from hunger. She may connect, but not from fear. Her relationships, if they arise, become acts of choice rather than compulsion. This is the maturity that solitude cultivates, the capacity to love without losing oneself. If we look deeply, we see that the woman who lives alone embodies a transformation of the human psyche itself. She is not merely adapting to social change, but participating in an evolutionary process, the gradual integration of opposites within the individual. The masculine and feminine, the dependent and independent, the lover and the thinker, all begin to coexist within her. In her solitude, she rehearses what future humanity may one day achieve, the capacity to be whole within even while reaching outward. To live without a man is not to live without love. It is to experience love differently as a movement of the soul toward authenticity rather than attachment. It is to replace the need to be chosen with the choice to be. Such women become, in their quiet way, the philosophers of modern life. They expose the illusions of romance, the dependencies masked as devotion, the fears disguised as fidelity. They remind us that the ultimate relationship is not between man and woman, but between self and soul. The modern world, for all its progress, still resists this realization. It continues to measure a woman's worth by her proximity to another. But the unconscious, that timeless mirror, knows better. It knows that true individuation requires solitude, that one must, at some point, be alone to discover who one truly is. The woman who lives without a man is simply living what the psyche has always demanded, to encounter oneself without disguise. Her life may seem unconventional, but it is, in truth, profoundly natural. Every human soul must, at least once, walk through the desert of aloneness to find the oasis of authenticity. Some do so early, some late, but few with as much clarity as the woman who chooses or accepts a life without a man. She carries within her both the grief of detachment and the ecstasy of self-realization. Her solitude is not emptiness but space, the vast space in which the self can finally breathe. And perhaps, if we learn from her, we may all begin to understand that being alone is not a failure of love, but its purification, the moment when affection ceases to be a transaction and becomes a state of being. In this sense, the woman who lives without a man is not deprived. She is complete. She is the living testimony that one can exist fully, even in the absence of the other, that the human soul, when freed from dependency, can stand luminous in its own light.